Welcome to the Liberation is Lit podcast, where the power of storytelling meets the force of social change. I'm your host, Taylor Simon, and in this podcast, we believe in the profound impact of stories. And I am so excited to be here with EbonyJanice, not Ebony, EbonyJanice. And we're going to talk about womanism and all the Black girls are activists and all of the things. So I'm excited. Welcome, EbonyJanice.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to write All the Black Girls Are Activists?
My name is EbonyJanice. As Taylor said, I go by EbonyJanice, which means that you should call me EbonyJanice. And funny, I know we'll talk about the book a little bit, but of course I talk about that kind of catchphrase a little bit in the book when I'm talking about pursuing your name and the importance of a name. And I define myself as a free woman on a love journey, which is basically just me both stating, just making a statement of my actual liberation, that I actually am free. And that's a big deal because sometimes people will treat you like you are not. These institutions will treat you like you're not. Your family even will treat you like you're not. And then the love journey piece is because there feels like nothing more important to me than love, particularly Black love. And a part of my freedom journey is exploring all the ways that I can show up in love. And I decided to write All the Black Girls Are Activists. I have told this story before, but I don't know if you've ever heard me tell this story before, that All the Black Girls Are Activists originally was supposed to be a romance novel, or that was my idea of it. Yeah. That I intended to tell this story about, kind of based on a true story, about this beautiful Black love experience that I was having. But it was in the midst of like 2019, 2020 uprising, upheaval. The world was at a standstill. It's not that there was a higher level of Black people being killed at the hands of our government and the police, but because social media and because we were all stuck in the house, we were able to pay a lot more attention to at all this violence that was happening to our bodies. And I was inspired one particular day, me and this person, we were in a long distance relationship at the time. And we were supposed to be having a FaceTime date, and a young Black girl in Ohio was murdered by the police. And we both just kind of had this moment of trying to process, can we still get on FaceTime and do hood rat things together? Or what do we have to do with our feelings about this baby that has just been, her life has just been taken by the police? And I started to think about, what does it look like to be Black and in love and with love? And having to process what it means to be Black, not being able to separate ourselves from that reality at all. And so All the Black Girls Are Activists, kind of the title is just like this idea that what will happen if we focused on love no matter what, if we never took our eyes off of love no matter what, if we never allowed the distraction of race and racism, which is absolutely the intention of it, to distract us from our humanity. Of course, some of that ideology comes from something that we've heard from Toni Morrison say it's such a distraction. That's the whole point of it, right? Like, you in love and you got to stop doing what you're doing to prove that you are worthy of just being in love. And the more I started to write about, just kind of like jotting down ideas of this storyline, the more I realized that the Black girls were going to need some theory first before they could believe that this was possible. And so then I started thinking about the theory, and I was like, this is not a romance novel yet. This is, we need to really realize that we are to embrace what it means to be womanist and to love Black people, to love Black women, to love Black folk, to love Black men. And how does that love manifest if we don't, if we haven't fleshed out our softness, our loudness, all these things that I'm talking about in the book. So yeah, that's where All the Black Girls Are Activists came from. It came from this idea of telling this story about this beautiful, beautiful love that I was experiencing that was also so political and impacted by the politic of the time at the same time.
Will we eventually get that romance, or?
Likely not, because every time I think about writing fiction in any way, shape, or form, there is a version of it that will happen, but that book will not happen because my romance novel era is just nasty gutter butt trollop. It's smut. And I'm just trying to figure out how to be deeply political and womanist and womanish and talk about dick sucking at the same time. Like, I could do it because it's possible, but it's just not my actual work. My actual work, if anything, is very likely to amplify some of my favorite Black romance authors and to talk about Black romance as a very specific thing. There are two. If you're talking about Black romance, just for clarity, there are two main characters that are Black. The author is Black. They are culturally Black. They are not ambiguous. They are Black. And so I feel very passionate about that because folk be getting these New York Times best-selling spots as, in romance, and it's so-called Black romance. Meanwhile, there's a quarter of a Black person in the story. So there's that. But yeah, so to amplify and lift the voices of some of my favorite Black romance novelists feels more important to me. And me doing my work to, support them in fleshing out their theory, and which I think is some of what I've been doing in building those relationships. And I would just write smut under a pseudonym. My pseudonym would probably be like something ignorant. Let me not even. So I was gonna say something so ridiculous.
I'm excited because no, I didn't read Stacey Abrams all of her romances, but she had a pen name, so she could do both politics and the smut. So we're here for it.
I'm not mad at, being multiple. Actually, funny enough, me and Rachel Cargle have joked for years about writing just really inappropriate things under a different name. And I feel like it should happen at some point, but I'm gonna just be honest, I'm very likely not writing fiction in that way anytime at all. I say there's some iteration of it because I've been working on a short film for a few years based on that particular relationship that I was mentioning. It's called Meet Me in Harlem. And it's a Afrofuturistic choose your own adventure love story. And so it's basically like the actual story of this relationship, but it's, there's several different ways that it ends, and there are several different ways that it begins, and there are several different timelines and lifetimes, and who knows when that will be made manifest. But that's probably the closest y'all will ever get to EbonyJanice in a real romance novel.
I love we'll take the story in whatever format. So I know you say your focus is more so on amplification and having these conversations, and you have many interests in decolonizing authority and hip hop scholarship and womanism. How do you connect all of these things together in your work?
Yeah, I think it is pulled together by the fact that I am one portion of the manifestation of God's personality. And God is so multiple that, growing up, we are really socialized into this reality. But particularly for me, because I do have so many interests that I'm deeply interested in, and I'm very invested in those ideas and concepts, that I have started to have some guilt or some, I'm like, need to find my niche. Meanwhile, my niche is just EbonyJanice, right? And so the more authentic I am, the more they just merge and make sense together, right? That I could talk about womanism from this hip hop perspective gives me the opportunity to really flesh out how I was raised both by the church and by hip hop. And so then hip hop becomes this sacred language. Womanism for me, the way that I enter into the womanism is not just the socio-political, but it's also spiritual religious, but it's also deeply, right, like throughout the waves, it's also deeply culturally relevant. And so there, of course, will be pop cultural elements of it, which hip hop and some of the language, and then there's the ethics. So it may seem like there's not scholarship, or it may seem like there's not popular culture or enough, right? It may seem very separate, but they all are in relationship with each other. Because think about it this way. Even though you speak English, we also share a lot of languages that are coded, right? You very likely in some way, shape, form, or fashion speak Black girl churchy. You very likely speak, in the language of the color purple. You very likely speak in hip hop in some way, shape, form, or fashion, right? There are all these ways that we speak in these multiple languages. So to think that there's only one way that we could communicate something or articulate something is, right, a colonized authority or a colonized intellect, that there's this one way. Meanwhile, I was talking to the Black girls, or, whoever I was talking to was crystal clear who I was talking to when I merged like 7 different languages in one sentence. And so, yeah, like I said in the beginning, I can pull all these things together because I know that my work on this earth, or part of my work on this earth, is to enflesh as one portion of God's personality. And God's personality is not just one thing, right? God doesn't sound like one thing. God doesn't look like one thing. God doesn't in flesh as one thing. And so I don't even know that we've come to the end of all the things that I'm deeply interested in. This is just where I am today.
I love that, and it's so funny that we're having this conversation because I'm rereading The Color Purple as an adult, and listening to it on audiobook, and I just got to the part where Shug and Celie were talking about what God looks like and how God is everything all at once and how everything is all connected. So I love that we're having this conversation right now.
I would like to encourage all Black femme folk to reread The Color Purple or to read it possibly for the first time as an adult. So I have this judgment of people of a certain age who haven't seen The Color Purple, Black women in particular, of a certain age who haven't seen The Color Purple. It feels like required reading, required viewing, and it tells me something about who you are, how you were raised. I don't care how you feel about this. This is my own filter, and so it is what it is, but it tells me something about you if you haven't. So I remember my cousin was dating this girl. I actually ended up marrying her. This is so shady because it's a true story. And when I first met her, I said something and I started speaking in The Color Purple. I may have been like, "Should like honey," and she was like, "What?" She was confused about that. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't gonna work. And they got married and divorced a few years later. And after he started healing through the divorce, I was like, I told you she wasn't the one. When that girl sitting up here talking about she didn't ever see The Color Purple before. I don't like slave narratives. Have you seen it? It's clear to me that we're not talking about slave people. But I seriously do encourage all Black femme folk to either read for the first time or reread The Color Purple as an adult, because there's a revelation of Suge and Celie in particular, but these characters, but Suge and Celie in particular, that I think is so profound to how we show up on a regular basis. You know, the that is very different from a Steven Spielberg, directed Suge or Steven Spielberg directed Celie. And because movie Suge is that girl, but is that bitch. And they are just not the same person in a lot of ways at all. So to be in relationship with Book Shug as an adult is like, oh, I didn't know that about myself. I have some of those same questions that Shug is, fleshing out, and, some of my respectability politics. So one example I'll give, and I'm done with this term, is I think about Suge, both Book Suge and movie Suge have this thing with her dad, the pastor. And there's some version of her, both in the book and in the movie, that does want his validation. But gets over it very quickly. And I don't think we really see that fleshed out in the movie the way that Book Suge is like, no, I have a theory around, I'm not just, a sinner, right? Movie Suge is like, see, Paul, God loves sinner too. That ain't Book Suge. Book Suge is crystal clear about her theology and how she arrived at this place. And even what she thinks about man's interpretation of God, which is why movie Suge doesn't really all the way make as much sense as, in relationship to Book Suge, because movie Suge is kind of question mark along the way. And Mister is such a central character to her. And that Book Suge it off. I love The Color Purple as a movie. It is at its own, piece of work. It is profound. It is fantastic. It is classic. And I return to it a billion times. But The Color Purple did its good work, honestly, in really revealing to us a womanist enfleshed reality. And I can't think of better text that really explains what Alice Walker was talking about when she came to the language of womanism and its definition in her book In Search of Our Mother's Gardens in the first place, right? Like she came to that and then was like, let me show you what a womanist looks like in all of its flawed, and beautiful multiplicity. So yeah, that's my sermon for today. If you have not read it ever, and or if you haven't read it in a long time, go reread The Color Purple, because she really is that girl.
That's why I had to return to it because I first read it in high school. And so that was me interacting with the text through Black girlhood. And same with a lot of Toni Morrison's work, specifically Sula and The Bluest Eye. I came to those coming of age through Black girlhood on my own because these
Okay.
were
I was
not
about to say, was
assigned.
this part of the curriculum?
No, absolutely not.
What? Well,
And
okay.
oh, no, definitely not in South Carolina.
Okay.
Had
Yeah.
2 Black authors. We read, Roll Thunder, Hear My Cry in 4th grade, and Their Eyes Were Watching God in 12th grade, and maybe A Raisin in the Sun in between. That's it.
Well, I still was doing some impeccable work because we got some poetry in throughout the years. We got Richard Wright, Black Boy. I can't think of another Black author that we really gave some energy to in the curriculum, and that's Sandusky, Ohio.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, who knows, at the rate we're going, we might not have any Black.
Yeah. You sure ain't getting no Gwendolyn Brooks the way
No.
that little banning basic conversations of people's lived experience, for sure.
Right. So, in talking about all of this work and labor, often unpaid, uncompensated labor that Black women do to improve the lot for all of us, you talk a lot about the pursuit of softness and how that's important in your own personal journey and liberation. But I find myself struck.
Yeah.
Capitalism is a hard drug to quit. How do you find that balance between softness and the Black woman urge to create and sustain movements for all of our collective survival and the ability to thrive?
Mhm. I don't think that I'm trying to find a balance. Actually, I'm trying to tip over even further into softness if I possibly can, because it's not an unfound idea that taking care of yourself first is what you must do. Little saying on an airplane from the beginning of time. If the oxygen drops out the ceiling, put your mask on first. And of course, there are a lot of mothers who would be like, I didn't put my baby mask on first. And or will have lost oxygen before you can properly secure the oxygen on the baby or the person sitting next to you, your mother, your family member, whoever it is. And so the more that I have realized, there's this Marianne Williamson. I believe it's Marianne Williamson. I don't like to improperly cite people because I want to give credit to, why can't I think of his name right now? He said it in his inauguration address in South Africa when he became the first. This is so awful when we realize who I'm talking about that I can't think of his name right now. Anyway, mother F, who am I as a people? So I want to give credit to Mandela, but I actually do think it is a Marianne Williamson quote where she talks about basically the more I am myself, the more I subconsciously give other people permission to do the same thing. And so my lived experience is that the more I get free, the more I become EbonyJanice, the more I do the work of sitting down in my body, which is a part of my own defining of softness, right? Because I'm not talking about the luxury girls, which I have no beef with whatsoever. But we're not talking about the same thing when we talk about softness. I'm talking about a regulating nervous system. I'm talking about literally what I have coined as the seat of Toni, right? Toni Morrison. Could say really hard things and do really heavy work from her seat. You know what your seat is. It's what you feel like when you're sitting all the way down and you're not up, leaned up in your body. There's nothing clenched. You don't have this knot in your stomach, this heaviness on your chest. You take in the deep breath into your full body and you have sat back and you are in your ease and you've released all of the energy, anxiety, anything that's contrary to a fully rested self. And so that's part of what I'm talking about when I talk about softness, that it is possible to get into that place and never say a word about marching to Selma or go tell it on the mountain or signing petitions. And all of those things are still a valid and necessary part of our liberation work. But that you first could show up as your actual self I've seen it with my eyeballs that the more I deepen into me, the more other people around me, without saying words, Taylor, right? I don't have to lift my hands to, I don't have to build a curriculum. I don't have to create a new workshop program. All of those things are worthy, incredible, but I don't have to, before I even get to that, I don't have to do any of those things. The more I show up as actual me in my seated self, the more people without words are like, I want some of that. I've seen it in my own family, for example, which is, I think, probably for many of us, the the first, not the number one, but the first place of trauma, the first place of oppression inside the family, because there are these expectations that are automatically put on you, these morals, these values, these rules, a hierarchy of eldership, and an enmeshed family value that you never got to vote on. You were just born into it. And so the family has its way of chipping at your authenticity from babyhood, right? From infancy. It's like not actual you, what mama said, not actual you, what grandma said, not actual you, what you are trying to mimic your elder siblings or cousins doing, right? And so the more you return to actual you, the more these people, this family who has been contrary in a lot of ways to that work, looks at you. It ain't overnight, of course, but looks at you and they start off resistant to it because how very dare you? And then they start to ask some questions. And then they start to ask some questions of themselves. And then the next thing you know, they're in pursuit of some, maybe not all of it, right? But in pursuit of some of that ease, peace, softness, actualizing for themselves without saying a word, right? That we didn't call over here in my family, we did not call a family meeting. We probably should have, but we didn't call a family meeting for me to say, guys, I want to be free. In spite and despite what anybody says, thinks, or desires. And so these are the new rules as it pertains to the Ebony Janice show, right? We didn't do that, but over the years, and I'm probably seriously, deeply about 10 years in the game, 10, 11 years in the game of like, this is more important to me than this enmeshment. This is more important to me even than even in these relationships, because I want to be me more than I want anything else in the world. And if and if being in this relationship, even with mama, even with daddy, even with sister, right? Even with my cousins, even with my aunties, if being in these relationships requires me to be a portion of myself or a version of the self that you're used to being in a relationship with, then I can opt out of those relationships. Again, none of that is easy, but has freedom ever been an easy project? No. So of course, personal freedom is not going to be an easy project, but I think it's the most important project. And so I'm not trying to find a balance of, and I say this in the book as well, that the girlies who are doing the work of doing this actual fourth wave womanist work, we're not doing it so that we can have greater capacity to serve other people. We're doing it so that we can actually be okay. And the profound benefit of that, which in mass, we don't really have a relationship with because we've not been doing this work in mass. But the profound, benefit of that or a result of that is that the deeper we see ourselves becoming, the more we see other people around us arriving at that revelation as well for themselves or some version of that revelation for themselves. And I think that that is more important than anything else. And we could look to the elders for this, and I'm done with my sermon. We could look to the elders for this, that there are so much of this text is really inspired by Black feminist, first, second, third womanist, scholars, theologians, thinkers, practitioners. So this is why there's a whole chapter on authority where I'm talking about citation and citing, even citing spirit, citing the source, right? That I don't arrive at a fourth wave of womanism and think that I am saying something profound that none of my elders have ever said, thought, imagined whatsoever. Perfect example of this is my baby boo, Pearl Cledge, who both in her essays from a scholarship perspective, fleshing out community and thinking about Black feminist thought, et cetera, But in her fiction, she's built this framework, and we get to see it play out in the community, in the book, right? In this fiction storytelling. And we get to see it in these characters, the way that they're thinking. I wish I had a red dress. There's a character who is at first a single woman at the beginning of the book who is helped to raise her siblings because of the loss of the life of their parents. And she has this program that is, hilariously titled The Sewing Circus because of like it used to be the sewing circle, but these bad tail kids started taking over in the basement of the church. So the grown people started calling the circus. So they called the group then the Sewing Circus. And she fleshes out this theory. It's 10 things every free woman should know. And so she's doing that in a fiction book, right? In the middle of you reading about this love story and this free woman and this da 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 whatever, you get to think about what are the 10 things that me as a free woman should know. And or before you even get there, you get to ask yourself the question, wait, am I a free woman? Right? So I'm 18, 19 years old asking this kind of question to myself. So there's this theory, this ethic, and this praxis inside this fiction text that my elder, right, one of these elder writers, has already been thinking out so much that she can translate it into fiction. She could create this whole world in which these free women get to live. And so I give Pearl Cledge so much credit. In the next book, I think is a whole chapter that will be dedicated to how Pearl Cledge characters really help to co-create my life ethic. But the softness is there. I'm talking about so-called, I'm doing quote fingers for those listening, the so-called strong Black women who were fully seated in their softness, thinking through, what do I need to know as a free woman? Disconnected from, even though there's a love story inside these texts, thinking disconnected from any man, any institution, any idea. Who am I? How do I embrace like these idiosyncrasies, these ideas that, seem faulty to other people externally, right? And so, yeah, I know that we're not thinking about softness. Maybe that is the language we're using, but I know that we're not in this moment thinking about softness for the first time. Our elders have crystal clearly been thinking about it. But we have the privilege of really leaning into it even more. And it would do a disservice to our elders and to our ancestors to not explore it in a deeper way. And I don't know necessarily that the exploration of it, for me personally, in my own estimation, for us in general, I don't think that the exploration of it should be trying to find a balance of how do I still lift heavy stuff while pursuing softness, that I pursue softness and I find that the way that I get to lift things from my seat, the way that I get to lift things with my regulated nervous system or regulating nervous system, the way that I get to lift things and create worlds for other Black women and femme folk, other Black people in general, other people who are worthy of their liberation and their freedom, is drastically less murderous than what has been there for us for so many generations, because we had no other understanding of our strength but through the lens of heavy lifting that will kill us. And that's not a metaphor for something. We have died for less.